Medal of Honor. Prepare for your finest hour. Good morning, Lieutenant. I'm Colonel Hargrove from the Office of Strategic Services. I'll get right to the point. The OSS was formed 2 years ago by presidential order to serve as the intelligence branch of the United States military. Our mission is anything and everything. Espionage, sabotage, subversion, search and rescue, you name it, we do it.
Medal of Honor was a historic game back in 1999. It had the backing of none other than one of the most successful directors in movie history, Steven Spielberg. It was developed by Dreamworks Interactive, which was Spielberg's company, who had just come off of making Saving Private Ryan a year earlier with Tom Hanks, and launched American entertainment into the World War II craze for the next decade. Then Hanks and Spielberg said, "Oh, you thought Saving Private Ryan was good? Well, bam! Let me hit you with that Band of Brothers, son!" The idea behind Medal of Honor originated with Spielberg himself, using the experience his son had with playing GoldenEye, along with Spielberg's well-documented interest in World War II, helped birth the concept behind Medal of Honor. In Medal of Honor, you play as Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson, an air transport pilot being recruited to the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS as it's referred to. You are tasked with completing various missions such as bringing back an American pilot, taking out a German U-boat, and going undercover to take out the Germans' railgun, all in the name of taking down the Nazis. Playing this game when it had come out amazed me. I had never seen a game about the World Wars before, or seen a game where enemies would react differently depending on where you shot them. Your actions actually felt like they had weight behind them, and it paid off when seeing the reactions. If you shoot them in the arm, they stop shooting and grab their arm in pain. Same goes for the other limbs as well. Catching an enemy off guard by sneaking up on them can make them fumble around with their weapons. Throwing a grenade and the enemy's trying to attempt to throw it back before it detonates. And shooting off helmets to see them try to put it back on adds a new layer of depth to the experience, besides just going through the game shooting guys 2 or 3 times and then they fall on the ground. All these things help to bring a new level of enemy awareness into video games that just wasn't present very much at the time. And that is what is impressive about this game, is the attention to detail. Nowadays, enemies reacting to the player's gunshots and whereabouts are commonplace, but Medal of Honor helped to bring it to the forefront in this department. The sound design is really impressive for its time as well. The plane sounds overhead, the weapons all have distinctions between them. And listening to the soldiers chatter in the background off screen. And let's not forget, the soundtrack is exceptional. As to be expected when associated with Spielberg's work. The soundtrack is the catalyst that helps propel the game into a cinematic experience rarely seen at this level in this point of gaming. If the soundtrack hadn't been made for this game, it could have easily just been made for that summer's action blockbuster film. The composer, Michael Giacchino, would go on to compose music for other video games and movies. One movie in which he won an Oscar for, Pixar's Up. There just wasn't much comparison with other shooters on the console at the time in regards to sound design or AI responsiveness outside of a handful of games like Siphon Filter and Metal Gear Solid. Come to think of it, there aren't very many first-person shooter games that came out on the PlayStation 1 other than PC ports like Quake 2, Doom, and Duke Nukem. Other than Alien Trilogy and Descent 2, I don't think it was the console for that. So PC was the way to go for the first-person shooters in the 90s because mouse and keyboard controls were far better than the fledgling PS1 controls. Anyways, needless to say, the production value in this game is fantastic. When you come to the main menu, you'll arrive at the OSS office. The menu is taking place within the scope of the game in a dynamic way to help set the stage. Men answering phones, writing up reports, using the map to outline enemy positions. Most games at the time didn't put much thought into something like a menu. Who thinks much about how the main menu looks if you just want to play the game? But this helps add to the atmosphere by you staying within the confines of the game. It all helps to make the experience seem more plausible. A sort of sense of urgency coming to light to realize the magnitude of this undertaking. You are here to save the world. There just wasn't much else like it at the time. Granted, I didn't play and review every release that came out for PlayStation or the PC during this time. I'm just some kid looking to play some cool looking shooter game. I don't recall getting very far in this game because I didn't own it at the time. I had borrowed it from someone else. So that concludes my experience with the game around the time that it had come out. My thoughts looking back now, the game is still fun. It may not be the best shooter around today, but as I mentioned in my Blasto video, we were still trying to figure out the controls in this era of gaming. We started to get things right using the right stick for the X and Y axis instead of just for strafing around the time the PlayStation 2 came out. The difficulty slightly increases with completing each mission, along with the complexity of the level's design, but sometimes this isn't always a good thing. In the sewers, for example, it can get very much like a maze. In the report, it says to go to the northwest corner of the second tunnel to find the weapons cache. But if you are further into that level and you head northwest, you won't find it. It's because it's closer to the beginning of the level instead of the end. So if you try to look for it after you've progressed further into the level, you have to backtrack to the beginning to look in that northwest corner. In instances like that, having a map to show where you have been would have helped with the traversal. Overall, I like the progression of the game as it ramps up, mixing stealth elements and action sequences to have a little give and take to the pacing instead of a traditional run-of-the-mill shooter. The weapons feel alright when you can line up your shot for one or two guys, but when you are surrounded by the enemy, aiming pretty much goes out the window and you resort to shooting Rambo style to get away from the situation. The levels themselves have some variety to them for sure, ranging from sewers, train stations, inside of boats, snowy mountainsides, and inside a V2 rocket silo. The movement in this game can be hard to come back to. It's hard to shoot from the hip since there isn't any aim reticle unless you use the manual aim with R2. The aim reticle wasn't a thing until Medal of Honor Underground came out. Other times you are getting caught on the terrain trying to go around a knee-high wall. Also, the field of view isn't very good when traversing the levels when you can only see 10 feet in front of you. But it sometimes works both ways with the enemies. Other times, they can see you from across the map. As the game progresses, I noticed I would get stuck on the geometry of the level quite often trying to avoid enemy gunfire, or just moving around in general. Throwing grenades seems to be more of a chore than it should be. I can't seem to get the timing right with throwing them. And the enemies, most of the time, just throw it back anyways. It's nice to see the enemies reacting to the grenades, but every time you throw one, they have to throw it back. You essentially start playing grenade chicken with them and see who blows up first. If I have to go with my thoughts on the game currently, I still enjoy the game even with all the shortcomings involving the movement and the low field of view. And while the level design for the most part is good, they can be very dark or maze-like with not much help with the compass. I believe this game is similar in a way to GoldenEye in that the fun of the game is just to mow down some enemies. It is for the most part a straightforward first-person shooter with great production values. But it also isn't just a shooter. The undercover sections can be fun as well, even if it is underwhelming in terms of being undercover as just flashing your papers and silently taking out guys for said papers. This game helped bring a sense of respect to those who fought in the war, similar to how Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers did with film and TV. I can see why this game has such high acclaim from the PlayStation 1 catalog. I too have respect for what this game brought to the table, and helped set up future games with better depth to storylines and an authenticity to the framework of the shooter genre to come.